we're going to get started. We are going to start with the Port Authority bills. I am going to invite up Assemblywoman Vainieri Huttle and Senator Gordon, along with colleagues who have joined us from across the river, New York State, Assemblyman Brennan and Assemblywoman Pollen. And I just want to say that as somebody who is Vice Chair of Transportation and who remembers very clearly back in 2011 when the whole issue of toll increases was raised, and we watched unfold a charade about tolls going up. The toll increases were not a charade. The charade was that they were going up much higher, and then both governors of the two states all of a sudden came in and said, no, that's too high. But they still went up significantly, and that was when the Transportation Committee with Chairman Wisniewski started the process of requesting information from the Port Authority, and requested and asked over and over politely and without any impact. We're stonewalled at every turn. And it was extraordinarily frustrating to be a member of the committee and not be able to get basic questions answered about toll increases, why they were important, how was the money going to be spent, and that was just the start. And it's really a little ironic to me that we're just about a year forward of the infamous stopping the traffic in Fort Lee, and when we started to have hearings on the Transportation Committee about that issue. And so I am pleased that we are working cooperatively with our colleagues across the river to speak to issues of transparency and accountability so that we will not have to spend a year issuing subpoenas to find out basic information about who authorized traffic studies and who made decisions ongoing when it comes to the Port Authority operations, which is such an important vehicle for us as a mechanism to meet our needs of infrastructure and for our economy in this region, because the port really is all of that. So I'm very pleased to welcome you, and to get started with these important bills, I will give the floor first to Assemblywoman Valerie Vainieri Huttle, my colleague.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Let me first begin by thanking you and members of the committee for hearing these bills today. As you stated, Chairwoman, as Vice Chair of the Assembly Transportation and Independent Authorities Committee, you are certainly well aware of the Port Authority's abuse of power and government waste. You sat in on those hearings regarding the Fort Lee Lane closure, which is now known as Bridgegate. And you know, as we all do, that reforming the Port Authority is no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how. And I see Assemblyman Michael Patrick Carroll, who's also a member on the Select Committee of Investigation, and I would hope that you support these critical pieces of reform. I hope not. It has. But with that, I also want to thank Speaker Prieto and Majority Leader Greenwald because so many of my colleagues, along with them, has signed on as co-sponsors of this legislation. Legislators, advocates, and commuters have long talked about changing the culture of the Port Authority, but this is the first time in decades that we are really in a position to make it happen. We are really on the verge of making history, and I hope that we act today before it slips away. I also want to highlight that in order to effect any binding change at the Port Authority, both states must pass laws to amend the Interstate Compact Agreement that created the agency in 1921, which is probably almost 100 years ago. So, to force real and meaningful change on the agency, both state legislatures must pass identical laws, and both governors must sign it. And this certainly takes extreme political will, and unfortunately is rarely done. As a matter of fact, the last time, it was in 1991, that both states came together to amend the compact to increase transparency at the agency by giving residents more access to agency meetings. So it's especially important for New Jersey to have partners in New York who are committed to this reform process. And as you mentioned, Chairwoman, we are fortunate to have two of those dedicated leaders here with us today, Assemblyman James Brennan and Assemblywoman Amy Paulin. Just a little background, Assemblyman Jim Brennan is the chair of the Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions Committee and the lead sponsor of A-3417 in the New York legislature. And Assemblywoman Paulin chairs the Energy Committee and is the primary sponsor in New York of the legislation which subjects the Port Authority to the Open Public Records Act of both states, which is the bill A-3350. So I'm pleased to welcome both of you, and of course, Assemblyman Brennan, welcome you back to Trenton since you were here, I guess it was last month. And of course, I want to recognize the lead sponsor of the bills in our Senate, Senator Bob Gordon, who really has a true understanding of the history of the Port Authority and is so passionate as why it needs change. Since before the lane closures and Bridgegate, the four of us have been working towards the same goal, which is ending the abuse and mismanagement at the Port Authority. If you recall, our original bill, Bob and I, was vetoed in 2012. So, let's be clear that when we see the Port Authority today showing, increasing interest in transparency and accountability, certainly these changes are not binding. What's here today could be easily gone tomorrow when the Port Authority is no longer in the daily news cycle and with the same chair and vice chair. Just last week, as you know, it announced that it would voluntarily submit the records to the Open Records Law of New Jersey and New York. That's great, and we applaud that. However, the key to their action is that it is permissive. Today, the agency wants to appear transparent. Will that be true in a year or two from now? I hope so, but our commuters certainly can't afford to take that chance. As the chairwoman said, this all began with the toll increases. And in October, path fares rose again to $2.75 for a single ride. And on December 7th, bridge and tunnel tolls will increase to $14. So I'm glad that my legislators from New York made it here before that dollar increase in the tolls. And next December, those tolls will rise again to $15 for one trip. So there really is nothing to stop the agency from doing what it did back in August 2011, when it had, if you recall, all of the public meetings on one day in inconvenient places, at inconvenient times for commuters and interested residents. Can the Port Authority allow more public scrutiny? Of course, whether fares increases are needed or what projects are approved, but the point is that it doesn't have to. So the Port Authority is only required to change if we here today make that change. And with these two bills, we have an opportunity to transform the way the $7 billion agency conducts business. Each year, as you know, approximately 100 million vehicles cross the George Washington Bridge, generating funds for the agency. And Bob and I, and Assemblyman Eustace, Assemblyman Auth, we represent those areas where we have traffic congestion and where most of our constituents do pay those high increase of tolls. And not only Bergen County, but it's certainly down in South Jersey and Central Jersey. All of us feel that pinch, but primarily up where we represent our constituents. These public dollars entrusted to a public entity to be spent on public purposes, including transportation, safety, and infrastructure, should be looked at. But sadly, there is little confidence today in the Port Authority acting on behalf of the public. And the only way to fix that is to reform the agency. So while the Port Authority wants to do business in a 21st century world, it still operates, unfortunately, under a 20th century mindset. The days of closed-door meetings, consent agendas, and backroom deals are over. It's time to bring the Port Authority into a new era of reform. Our legislation on the bill would require changes such as public participation in toll and fare increases, an independent efficiency study every 2 years, and whistleblower protections for employees who are afraid to report suspected corruption or criminal activity at the agency. These reforms are necessary to make the agency accountable and to restore the public trust in the Port Authority. I want to again highlight in closing the unique opportunity we have here today. New York has passed this legislation unanimously through both houses, the Senate and the Assembly, in a bipartisan way. And so has the New Jersey Senate. And we need to really fix or get that last piece of the puzzle here in the Assembly. We are so close to enacting comprehensive bi-state, bipartisan Port Authority reform. So I am thankful to the chairwoman of the committee and the committee members for listening to my testimony. And I hope that this really gives us the fine opportunity to make the Port Authority accountable to all the residents, not only in New Jersey, but in New York. So with that, I thank you again, Chairwoman Stender.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman, and thank you for your advocacy and hard work on this. I know this has been quite a focus and commitment for you for quite a while, and so I think we're going to be able to get some good things done for all of us. Now, I think we will invite our guests to speak to us as well on this important issue, because I know how hard our sponsors and many members have worked on this issue on our side. We welcome you to the great state of New Jersey. And
indeed, it's great to be here. The second time, I didn't get lost this time around. I managed to get to the New Jersey
You'll
state.
have to come more frequently.
And I'm delighted that my colleague from Westchester County, Assemblywoman Amy Poland, who is chair of the Energy Committee and sponsor of the Freedom of Information Bill, is also with us. Chair Stender, and some materials are being distributed related to my testimony, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about A-3417. My office has worked closely and collaboratively with Assemblywoman Valerie Vainieri Huttle and State Senator Robert Gordon to develop this legislation. We've been working together since January of this year. Identical legislation has already passed the New York State Assembly, sponsored by myself, and the New York State Senate, sponsored by Senator Andrew Lanza, this past June. And as you know, the New Jersey Senate passed the same bill several weeks ago. The legislation brings substantial and comprehensive reforms to the Port Authority. As Senator Gordon mentioned, criticism that this is insignificant, I think, is just inaccurate. It elevates good governance and good government in the following ways. It requires the commissioners to perform the fiduciary duties of loyalty, care, and good faith as board members, exercise independent judgment, and act in the best interest of the authority, its mission, and the public interest. They must certify and acknowledge these duties and receive training in these duties. It imposes on the officers and employees of the authority the duty to report corruption, abuse, and conflicts of interest to the Inspector General of the authority. The Inspector General, which is only in the bylaws of the Port Authority at the moment, is established by law with investigatory and subpoena power, and whistleblower policies must be adopted by law in addition to whatever they have done in their bylaws. Specifies that the Port Authority is subject to the open meetings laws of both states, sets forth the process for declaring executive sessions, requires minutes to be taken in all the meetings, and requires that the votes on particular items be itemized so that you see each particular vote by the commissioner in the minutes, which is something that they've been criticized for not doing. It requires the commissioners, officers, and employees to file financial disclosure statements, prohibits commissioners from voting when they have a conflict of interest, and requires them to declare if they have a conflict of interest. So issues associated with the former chairman, that person, if they had some kind of financial relationship in relation to their business, it would have had to have been disclosed beforehand and prohibited from voting. It establishes governance, finance, and audit committees of the board. Among the duties of the governance committee, it must report to the board at the first meeting of the year how officials of the two states who work for the governors are assuring maximum cooperation, communication, and coordination. So every year, and presumably if the first meeting is in January, the public will hear from the governance committee to the report to the board how the two states are working together, which is what they ought to be doing. It requires clear capital and operating budgets, requires the long-term capital plan to show what projects are proposed, what they will cost, and the expected source of funding. Debt to be issued in the following year must be disclosed. So, for instance, the toll hikes had a relationship to how much debt the Port Authority was going to issue in the following year. So a year in advance, the Port Authority would have to disclose to the public and to the legislatures and the governors how much debt it is anticipating and how much it's going to cost. And if there are issues, they can be addressed before huge toll hikes might be on the table. Major construction projects must have independent oversight. So, for instance, the cost overruns on the World Trade Center, of which were billions of dollars. This large expenditures of that nature require an independent engineering consultant to continuously monitor and provide reporting on issues associated with major construction projects. So some of these problems associated with the billions of dollars in cost overruns could hopefully have been averted with greater focus on oversight over the construction of the Freedom Tower and other parts of the Trade Center. The board must adopt policies in writing on property acquisition, provide explanations in the annual report on property purchased or sold without competitive bid, and report on below-market disposition. Before a toll hike can be approved, an independent needs assessment must be completed 120 days before the toll hike. And then my two New Jersey colleagues wanted that in the legislation, you know. And explanations must be provided. 6 public hearings must be held not more than 90 days and not less than 30 days before a toll hike decision is made. And there are a variety of other financial and ethical requirements. And we believe the standards in this legislation address bridgegate, toll hikes, cost overruns, conflicts of interest, inappropriate property acquisition in a manner that would deter similar problems from arising in the future. So I thank you for your consideration.
You know, I just want to, all of us being legislators know how hard it is to get a bill through our own 2 houses and signed by the governor. So here we have 6 partners. And, so I wanted you to know, even though my bill is a no-brainer, the bill that I sponsored, it's among the initiatives that you've just heard, very simple. It just subjects the Port Authority to what we here in the legislature, both in New Jersey and New York, are subjected to. But it was no less, it was as complicated to get through that little bill as it is the larger bill. Why? Because of all the partners involved and because the laws are different and because the requirement is that they be exactly the same. So we've worked very well together, very hard together to come up with a set of reforms that we believe the public deserves. And, we've had clearly the opportunity with what transpired to do something that really needed to be done for a long time. So we're very proud of it. We're really here just to support our colleagues in New Jersey and to let you know that we really intend and want to get all 6 partners on board by the end of the process.
Thank you very much. I particularly appreciated the breakdown of how each of these reforms speaks to major issues that we are all very aware of, especially as those of us that were on the Transportation Committee, and frankly for all of us in the state of New Jersey, because it's been such a big issue.